Welcome everyone to our Q&A with Mind Medicine on psychedelics and psychedelic-assisted therapy. My name is Audrey. I'm the co-founder of Mushroom Mob. Mushroom Mob is an NFT project on the Cardano blockchain, and we focus on mental health and well-being using a multidisciplinary approach, and our actions are heavily inspired by the mycelium. For example, we encourage people to engage in health-promoting behaviors through community well-being activities, and we find that community sense of encouragement and social feedback is a way in which we can all work towards a common goal. Also, because mushroom is our muse, we do things to support fungi, and so 15% of our profits will be donated to fungi-related charities such as fungi conservation, but also to research psychedelic-assisted therapies for mental illness with the fungi derivative of psilocybin, for instance. So it is my absolute pleasure to invite Mind Medicine Australia to have this Q&A session with us. Mind Medicine Australia is a registered charity which aims to help alleviate the suffering and suicides caused by mental illness in Australia. They support clinical research and work towards expanding treatment options available to medical practitioners and their patients with evidence-based psychedelic-assisted therapies. Mind Medicine Australia is focused specifically on the clinical application of medicinal psilocybin and MDMA for certain mental illnesses. So we're joined today by Gavin and Ilan. Gavin is the Chief Marketing Officer, and Ilan, who is coming under the Mind Medicine Australia Twitter account today, is the Operations Manager. So thank you both for joining us on a Monday afternoon for you guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. How are you guys? Would you start by
It's a pleasure
telling
to be here.
Yeah, doing good, doing good. Yeah, it was a pleasure to jump on Twitter and talk to like-minded people who are interested in the work we're doing. Because yeah, we talk to ourselves a lot of the time, but it's nice to talk to you guys as well, talk to the general public.
Yeah, the deep abyss of the internet, I'm sure. Um, Well, we'll start, Gavin, if possible, telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved with Mind Medicine.
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually just saw a ad for a webinar that I guess my colleague Julia probably would have run, and I attended the webinar and I added Peter Hunt, who's the co-founder of Mind Medicine, just on LinkedIn, just because that's kind of what I do. Is I'm sort of attending a webinar, I want to see who's running it, and I reached out and said looking forward to the webinar, and then he basically saw that I had some background in marketing in this particular space. I'd worked with some authors like Jamie Wheel and Stephen Kotler in Stealing Fire, and I'd been at a company called Mind Valley and sort of helped do digital marketing in the sort of space of meditation and consciousness and kind of a related field. And so he said, would you be willing to come in and do a bit of pro bono work for us? So I volunteered for a little while with Mind Medicine, and then after a point in time, it became, it looked like there was some scope for me to sort of jump in and help out with the marketing, and so it kind of just came through from there.
Wow, what a chance opportunity. And I'm so glad to hear that everything's kind of paved out and worked quite well for you. What about you, Ilan? How did you come to know about Mind Medicine?
So my story, I guess, goes back nearly a decade, believe it or not. For the last 10 years, for the last 10 years or so, since I finished uni, I've been working in the healthcare space, and that's primarily driven by a passion of mine to work for a purpose as opposed to just working for the sake of working and helping other companies provide some sort of output. But over time, I was working for a diversified GP group who was actually divesting their assets in Australia. And through that process, I became more attuned to the real investment and need to expand the mental health options in Australia. And given that journey, serendipity came across, and I literally opened up the Financial Review back in 2019, I think, and there was a full-page article about the work that Peter and Tanya were doing at Mind Medicine Australia. And I was quite enthralled by it. And then similar to Gavin, I actually reached out to Tanya. And I guess the irony of it all is that I had actually met her about 8 years before when I moved from Sydney to Melbourne. And I told her that, and I told her that I've been working in healthcare and that I was looking at getting involved in a new project. And similarly, I just jumped on board for about 2 months or so, just helping out consulting. And the next thing I know, I've been here nearly 3 years full time and still at it.
I'm dropping you both some heart emojis here because I mean it's quite a story. But look how at the root of it you're all really driven to do good and to keep good and really that's the primary reason why we're here today in this space as well. Because yeah, we kind of have that in common, and so I'm really grateful that you guys have been in contact with us as part of Mushroom Mob, and we can do this Q&A session to help other people understand, why is it that mushroom mobs are wanting to support psychedelic research? Because I feel like that is something that we have to answer a few questions on. And so for you guys to be able to do it, as that would be a fantastic way forward. My mention, I just request you to mute your microphone. Perfect, thank you. So let's just get started on the questions here. So for all of you who have just dropped in, thank you again for joining us. I'm expecting more people to pop in as the space goes on, but if you did have any questions, feel free to comment on the pinned tweet at the top and we can add some questions to the end. I myself have a couple of questions that I'd like Gavin and Ilan to answer, and it's primarily to help us to understand psychedelic-assisted therapies and why is it that we actually need a bit more research in this area. So first of all, either Gavin or Ilan, could either of you tell me about, what are the mental health statistics in Australia or New Zealand and even internationally? Like, why is it that mental health is an issue that we should firstly address?
You want to take this one, Ilan?
Sorry, sure, absolutely. So I think let's just break this down into two core time periods. So there's pre-COVID and then there's post-COVID. So if you look at the current states, pre-COVID, about 1 in 5 Australians, so that equates to about, I think, 4.8 million people had a chronic mental health condition. Now, subsequently, as a result of COVID, 4 in 5 Australians are now reporting poor mental health, and 34% of them have actually said that their mental health has declined because of the pandemic. I can't speak about overseas stats just because I don't have them, but certainly in Australia, we are now looking at about 1 in 8 Australians are now on antidepressants. And sadly, during COVID, there were reports of children as young as 4 years old also being prescribed antidepressants. And then on a more national level, we're looking at about 45% of Australians will experience some sort of mental illness during the course of their lifetime. Now, globally, this has been estimated, and then globally, there has been an estimated increase of more than 129 million cases of major depression and also anxiety disorders during the pandemic. So we are really looking at a global crisis here. And I know it sounds a bit alarmist, but it's something which has to be addressed because ultimately we don't know how things will pan out in the next 5 or 10 years or so.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely right in breaking it into a pre-COVID versus a post-COVID. I remember reading an article quite recently about how with COVID, they kind of affected different age groups differently. For example, like the younger millennial type generation may have been more negatively impacted by the effects of COVID. Would you say that would be the same in Australia as well?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's also important to realize that one of the huge benefits of psychedelic-assisted therapies is that we actually have the opportunity now to treat people closer to the core of their trauma. So, the sooner that we can treat people, so the less chronic an issue becomes, and also the less, I guess, chance of leakage, so to speak, of that affecting other generations stemming from people. So, it's really a matter of allowing, the younger generation now access to these treatments before treatments become chronic, I guess. But then at the same time, we can also treat people who have chronic issues as well.
So speaking of treatment, what are the current treatments available at the moment?
Gavin?
Well, there's certainly two that we're focusing on at the moment, and we've submitted a application that Ilan and Peter have worked very hard on to the TGA to reschedule for research in Australia. And that's one is psilocybin and the other is MDMA, and both being used in conjunction with psychotherapy. So we call it psychedelic-assisted therapy. So those are the two major ones, and they, MDMA isn't necessarily what you'd classically call a psychedelic, but I suppose the thing that both psilocybin and MDMA have in common is essentially what they'll do is they'll allow someone to enter into what we call an altered state of consciousness or non-ordinary state of consciousness, where they're able to really achieve a high level of insight and a high level of sort of understanding as to what is actually causing some of their underlying issues, and also a deeper sense of psychological safety. And it's in that altered state where someone can really be taken through a course of therapy that's going to help them sort of unpack that stuff and cope with it in better ways. And I'll also sort of preface that by saying I'm not a therapist. I'm certainly very passionate about this, and we work on this space. But if you do want to look at some of the more therapeutic literature on this, you can go to our website and you can see some of that out there. But that's the broad strokes overview of how it all works.
Sure.
So I think it's also important to note that we aren't looking at, God forbid, replacing current therapies, because they do work for a certain cohort. What we are focusing on is treating chronically ill patients who really have exhausted current treatment options. And our mission as a charity is really to expand the treatment options available to patients as well as practitioners. And it's really now a matter where hopefully practitioners can discuss psychedelic-assisted therapies just as they discuss patients taking antidepressants. We just want this to become, I guess, a normal discussion as part of a treatment protocol if it's deemed appropriate.
Sure. I feel like there's so much to unpack in what you both shared in only a couple of minutes. So let's just take it back one step. Like, how would you actually define psychedelics? Like, how do they actually work?
Well, the word psychedelic means mind manifesting. And so in a sense, it's, these are classically sort of substances which would be, used in indigenous cultures as well for deeper introspection and an expansion of consciousness. MDMA, I think, it's a little bit more along the lines of allowing someone to sort of decrease that sensation, increase feelings of safety, and trust, so they can really sort of open up and process some of that deeper underlying issues. But yeah, that's I suppose my working definition of psychedelics, having been in this space for a while.
Sure. And so, I mean, you mentioned, Ilan, not that long ago, that the goal is not to replace current treatments. So it's just psychedelics. And I completely understand that. And so it's more for those who have exhausted the current treatment options, and psychedelics can help to achieve an altered state of consciousness. How effective do you reckon psychedelics are compared to current mental health treatments?
Sorry, I was turning on my mic. I think it's now important to if you look at last year, so in 2021 there were 2 pivotal trials which came out. So there is a MAPS phase 3 trial. So MAPS is a US-based organization headed by a guy called Dr. Rick Doblin. I don't have to give your listeners a history on them, but their phase 3 trials, I think, showed an over 80% cure rate of patients with chronic PTSD. Now, no other pharmacotherapies have been able to copy that in any form or way. And then similarly, there was a trial out of the UK where they treated alcoholics. And, with current treatment protocols like going to AA, so the advice is to tell a patient to then refrain from drinking. So what the trials have shown is that a patient can actually go out and drink socially. So the psychedelics ultimately like reset the brain, so to speak, and then they allow a person to actually interact in a normal way amongst normal society, just as they would when they were healthy. In fact, I've got the trial results open here. So the MAPS phase 3 trials showed that so the NET trial treated 90 patients with severe or also chronic PTSD. And these patients suffered for an average duration of about 14 years. And also what's fascinating, so then out of those patients, they found that 67% of participants who had 3 MDMA assisted therapy sessions no longer actually qualified for a PTSD diagnosis. And 88% of those patients experienced a clinically meaningful reduction in symptoms. So the treatments are shown to work. It's a matter now of just creating the ecosystem to allow them to be delivered to those who need them.
Yeah, and I think there's become an increased awareness of the effectiveness of these treatments. And it's funny because Mushroom Mob is a fungi-inspired one, and there are several other fungi-inspired NFT projects. And it's interesting how essentially, a good chunk of them are actually wanting to donate to psychedelic research, because we understand that that the rates of mental illness are rising, and we see great potential in this space. And so it's a really fun way of being able to not only kind of like express our art and invite the community to say, like, look, this is actually something that could really work and could benefit our future generations. However, I feel like there are still some who are quite reserved when we talk about psychedelics and psilocybin. And I feel like part of that is because a lot of the time they are grouped along other sides, other drugs like, heroin and cocaine. How did psychedelics actually get such a bad name?
Gavin, take it away. That's your department.
Well, what's interesting with some of these, substances and psychedelics generally is you'll hear a lot of this term, the psychedelic renaissance, which obviously means rebirth, right? And that's because, psychedelics this isn't the first time that psychedelics are being considered for, use in therapy. In fact, they were used in therapy, for quite a long time. And don't quote me on the exact statistics, but from memory, it was upwards of 10 or 20,000 people or more, maybe I can get the exact statistic, were taken through these sorts of trials in the 60s. And even you had companies like major pharmaceutical companies synthesizing MDMA, and it was actually quite promising, quite promising field of research. Now, there's probably a lot to the story, but one of the dominant things that caused psychedelics to be, classified as very dangerous drugs was an overall campaign, a war on drugs by Nixon. And we certainly have the perspective and the view that this was, significantly less based on science and research, but more based on wanting to sort of suppress anti-war protesters. And around that time, of the Vietnam War, there were a lot of people who were saying, don't drop bombs, drop acid, and all this kind of stuff. And so the counterculture and the anti-war movement and the psychedelics movement were quite closely related. And so there is, we certainly take the perspective that a lot of the suppression of these substances was wanting to actually just suppress the anti-war movement itself, and without being able to sort of suppress people's right to free speech and the right to protest by classing substances that they were often using or in possession of as dangerous drugs. That was one way to sort of criminalize dissent. So that's a big part of what happened there.
Interesting. And so based on that, I guess a lot of the policies and the laws that we have are stemming from those historic decisions. So what are the current policies around the use of psychedelics and psychotherapy, and how is Mind Medicine targeting that?
Well, yeah, so they're currently scheduled on our poison schedule at Schedule 9, which is essentially saying it's a poison with no therapeutic use, right? Which is, the research is... Beg your pardon, Ilan?
I said value according to the TGA's definition.
Yeah, no therapeutic value. So that's, it's becoming increasingly clear from clinical research overseas, and even Australia's running $15 million in research this year alone. That there is obviously, certainly in our perspective, some significant therapeutic value in these substances, and so we're pushing very strongly to downschedule them from Schedule 9 to Schedule 8, so that people can access them for therapeutic value in treatment-resistant cases.
So what more is needed in order to get down from Schedule 9 to Schedule 8?
Yeah, that's an excellent question again, and so we can link you to the specific TGA submission, but basically, and somewhat understandably, to be honest with you, the regulators are designed to sort of stop people from having negative experiences with substances. So they basically wanted to ensure that the substances would be provided for medical use only, that they weren't going to kind of go out into the community, that everything was going to be dealt with in a cautious way, and that some more research needed to be done on these substances. Now, whilst we can kind of understand their caution, we also feel at the same time there's a significant cost of not acting urgently enough, because people this is in many respects a life and death situation, and a very sort of untenable situation for a lot of people who are living with severe PTSD. So whilst we understand and appreciate the cautious approach, we also feel that there's a very, very high cost to delaying here as well. So we want to move that forward with as much compassion and care and cautious optimism as we can. And certainly your community will definitely be able to help. In the next few weeks, we're expecting the public submissions process for the TGA to open up, which means that the community can voice their support for a decision, and that's where your community would be really, really encouraged and appreciated if you could show some of your support to the TGA and demonstrate that there is a really strong public demand for increased access here. And I'm sure Ilan can tell you a bit more about that as well.
Yeah, Ilan, would you like to elaborate on that further?
Yeah, I think just based on the current topic, it's really important to understand that we are getting huge amounts of support from the wider community, but unfortunately, the pushback that we're getting at the moment is really just from a bureaucratic point of view. And our main focus now is really just to break down that taboo and I guess the discussion which has to happen in order for the legislators to allow a pathway for the treatments to become accessible. And that's largely done through garnering public support and really building up a grassroots movement. So at the end of March, like Gavin said, we actually submitted applications to the TGA for the second time to ask them to consider downgrading MDMA and also psilocybin from a Schedule 9 to a Schedule 8, and those applications can be viewed on our website. And then at the beginning of this month, the TGA were meant to open up the submissions for public feedback, but unfortunately, they still haven't opened up the public submission phase. And every day I've been checking the website to see when that will be, but there's been no update from them. But certainly we will reach out to your community as soon as that public submission phase has opened up, because ultimately, once we can show the government that there is support, I think it's very hard to turn down public sentiment, and it's something that the government really has to consider.
Yeah, you're right, because if the government's role is to essentially represent the nation, then, by getting more, voices and people rallying together as a community or as our mycelium, that's the way that we can get our voices heard. But yeah, we say an email.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. And also, I think it's important to outline that we are seeing a contradiction going on from a political point of view. So the TGA have got a thing called the Special Access Scheme. So that is a program which has been designed to allow practitioners to apply to the TGA to give a chronically ill patient and unapproved therapy. And that can be from, I guess any sort of, it can be from any sort of practitioner for a patient who is currently treatment resistant, and all they are doing essentially is just applying for special permission to give this patient access to treatment. So similarly, we have seen over the last 12 months or so, psychiatrists apply to the TGA for special permission for MDMA and or psilocybin-assisted therapy. And so far, I believe that the TGA have given over 42 approvals over the last 12 months. Now, that's just phenomenal. If we think that there are 52 weeks a year, and then 4 weeks a year of leave, so there's about 48 working weeks a year, give or take. So basically, the TGA have been giving one approval a week, one approval every 1.5 weeks. Now, unfortunately, they aren't advertising that they're doing this, but it definitely shows a sentiment that there is an element in the TGA which is supporting these therapies. But sadly, where we are at the moment is, even despite a psychiatrist getting SASB approval from the TGA, unfortunately, we are seeing a block from the states. So a practitioner still has to apply to their state to import the medicines. And sadly, no state in Australia yet has proven that they can or are willing to accept a TGA approval. And that's something that we're working on closely, just at a national level. Ideally, we would love to see some sort of national framework to help differentiate between, I guess, recreational use and clinical use. And also, it's important for your community to note that we are focused only on a clinical aspect of these medicines. But over time, hopefully we can break down the barrier of the state to actually import the medicines. But that's really the obstacle that we're facing at the moment.
Yeah, it sounds almost like you're allowed to get the toolbox, but you can't get the tools. So
Yeah, exactly.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And in fact, we had an event a few weeks ago. Gavin was with us, and unfortunately, a lady got up in tears, and she basically said that. She said, I feel like I've got the tools to do my job, or the tools to be treated, but I can't actually, buy them.
yeah, that's
and it's very frustrating for people, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think another point that Ilan made, I think, is very good. This idea that there's something of a contradiction, because you probably would see there's obviously wonderful groups like yourselves spreading the word of these things, and we're doing it, and you're seeing lots of mention of psychedelics in the media. So at the start of the year, we actually ran a national poll to actually get a sentiment test of where the Australian public stood on psychedelics, and we were actually really pleasantly surprised. Well, maybe not surprised, but we were very happy to see that. In the polling, 67% of people agreed that people experiencing mental illness should have the choice to use psychedelic-assisted therapy to ease end-of-life distress. 63% of people agreed that people experiencing mental illness should have the choice to access psychedelic-assisted therapy in medically controlled environments, and that they should have the alternative option, when they didn't have success with other treatments. And that's, again, 60% of people agreed that the difference between medical and recreational use of psychedelic substances should be legislatively recognized. So in a sense, what we are seeing is a disconnect between the sentiment of the public and the law, and it tends to work that way, that the law will catch up with where people are feeling. So we're quite optimistic and hopeful that we're definitely heading in the right direction.
And it sounds like mind medicine, I mean, I can hear the passion in your voices, right? You're doing a lot in breaking that taboo and bridging the gap between consumer and government. What else are you guys up to at the moment?
What aren't we up to? That's the question. we have a lot of ideas and a lot of ways we're trying to do this.
We are quite nimble as to how we work. So our mission, and then after this, I think Gavin can explain as to how we will achieve this. But basically, we are focusing on, quote unquote, creating the ecosystem And that ecosystem is very broad. Everything has to be made, from trials to, I guess, bureaucracy, to even sourcing the medicines, to the general awareness, like doing things like this. There's a whole range of things that we are doing. Gavin, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, arguably, the most important piece of it, and one of the other pieces of criticism that the TGA sort of came back at us with was, look, we can make these substances available, but where are the therapists who are trained in actually how to deliver these, forms of therapy? It's not like you get taught how to be a psychedelic-assisted therapist in a traditional counseling or, psychology program. And so one of the things we've done is we partnered with some very, very, very talented psychologists and psychotherapists called Dr. Trail Dow and Nigel Denning to form something called the Mind Medicine Institute, which is an independent training organization that trains, people with medical backgrounds and therapeutic backgrounds in how to become a psychedelic-assisted therapist using really the best protocols. Arguably in the world, because we've gone really into the international space to find the best people to help design this curriculum and really bring a world-class faculty together. And a really, really, really big piece of what we do is to get the medical, and the clinicians on board to be able to understand how these things work. And the response we're getting from people there, from the clinicians, is just absolutely outstanding. That they love the course, they see the potential, and they really see how and why these things can be so, powerful for their patients when used in the right ways. And that's giving a lot of hope to a lot of clinicians and psychiatrists who feel as though, no matter how hard they try with traditional forms of talk therapy and a lot of the traditional things they've been taught, they can't quite break through some of that rigidity in people's minds. But with the use of psychedelics, it really, really assists them, as the name suggests, in their therapeutic endeavors to really heal their patients. And that's what they're really all about. So that's another big part of what we do.
Yeah, and I think that was the aspect, Mind Medicine Institute, that I thought was particularly novel and very exciting. Out of curiosity, in order to attend these courses, do you have to be residing in Australia, or is it open to international?
Sorry, cut up a little there, but you're asking whether we're going to do something in New Zealand or?
So I just know that there are some people in this space who do practice in the field but aren't necessarily based in Australia. Is it like an online course, or is it in person? What are the avenues available to someone who lives abroad?
Yeah, well, it's a mixture of both, and we do have international people attending the online component. We do that as a weekly, online component during the course. There are also live intensive, like in-person intensive, where people will all get together and do that. And yeah, we'd absolutely love to expand internationally. And New Zealand will probably be the first place we'll look at, because we get a lot of clinicians from New Zealand, and we're obviously very close, proximity wise. So yeah, that's something we're absolutely looking at. Hopefully you'll see that from us in the next, well, I don't make any promises, but in the next few months would be great.
And Gavin, there's also the foundation course, don't forget, which is open. So the fundamental course is a self-paced 4-week online course, and that's open to anybody with any. So, sorry, that course is open to anybody with an interest in the field, and it's not solely focused towards practitioners, but also just helps us to gain awareness and to help empower people with a knowledge of these treatments.
That's absolutely fantastic. And I noticed that you guys also run online webinars. Is that right?
Sorry, I didn't catch that. What was that?
Sorry, you cut out. Yeah.
I also noticed that you run free online webinars. Is that correct?
Yes, lots of webinars, and we get some really cool guests on as well. And we do that all for free, just to raise awareness and create that forum for anyone to show up and learn.
That's absolutely fantastic. So at Mushroom Mob, we're trying to think of innovative ways to educate people and to help spread messages about things like psychedelic-assisted therapy.
We'd love to present to your community.
Yeah, that would be amazing. We're also sort of like hosting a viewing party for one of the webinars, and then doing like a quiz to test people's retention, and just to kind of do it in a fun and engaging way, but to make sure that we all have the same messages, and as a community, upskill and educate ourselves in some really important messages.
Well, that's it, because it's interesting when you look at how people know and how the public knows. We've looked at some of this data as well. people tend to trust their friends more than they'll trust, the news and the media, especially these days, right? So by educating and empowering yourself with a pretty solid knowledge of how these things work, you really do have the ability to, tell your friends and family in a not in a weird way, but certainly in like a look, I've taken a course and here's what I've learned kind of way, and that's a really powerful grassroots way of spreading the message and really destigmatizing these medicines.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I don't know whether you have the skinny mobile phone in Australia, but they did a great campaign about how everybody even bother with marketing because they're just going to touch their friends, right? So they invest in, incentivizing your friends to tell you about it. They're more likely going to get the customers. And I guess it's the same with everything, really. You are going to trust the people that you're mostly connected to, because you've already got that foundation with them. So yeah, who knows? Maybe
And
spread
I
the
think on
message.
that note, it's also important to realize that our focus is really so because we are set up as a charity, we really have got no commercial bias or any bias particularly towards anything. We are really here just to help facilitate, create the entire ecosystem for these therapies. And part of that, as you said, has to we have been able to garner and to garner an advisory panel of I think over 70 experts across a whole range of fields. And really, like influence stems from the top. And the overall advocacy work that we've been doing has really, to deal with the federal government and the national government, etc. And that's how we have been able to break down the barriers slowly over the last 3 years. And we have seen progress, although we aren't there just yet. But definitely Gavin can attest that the discussion now is, I guess, fundamentally different to where we were 3 years ago when I first started here.
Yeah, absolutely. And like Ilan said, we're focusing on, a top-down approach as well as a bottom-up approach, because at the end of the day, that's, they are both important. Yeah, we sort of keep an eye on both. And honestly, we're overall very excited and very optimistic about the direction it's going. And we, sort of applaud everyone who's done their part to push this forward, because we're very confident that it's going to lead to an overall shift in a paradigm of how we understand what mental health even is, and what it means to be a healthy, high functioning, conscious, human being. So it's all very exciting.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm assuming that the advocacy and that paradigm shift also kind of does depend on doing a bit more research in this area. So I'm interested to know what kind of research is still needed, and what is actually happening at this moment.
Yeah, well, so one of the things that there's a lot of really cool clinical trials that are happening, at major universities in Australia, Monash University and Swinburne, and some of the stuff they're testing is, psychotherapy plus meditation versus psychotherapy plus, psychedelics, which I think is a really cool test. And yeah, I think people, I'd say we're ready to certainly, as Ilan and Peter will tell you, like start using these things for treatment-resistant people who don't really have any other options, but I think it'll be very interesting to see how these can be used for treating sort of general anxiety disorder, and how to sort of sustain these, these benefits longer term, and what that kind of looks like, and how people can take those insights and then integrate them broadly into their lives. So there's a lot of work to be done, but it's all sort of tending in the right direction. And what other trials are being done, Ilan, that you can speak to?
Oh, there we go. Sorry. I think it's important to also mention that so last year, due to
Ilan, you there?
Hello? Hello? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, fantastic. Yes, I was going to say that last year we saw the federal government announce a $15 million grant towards novel mental health therapies, and that actually has practically resulted in over 7 psychedelic trials being announced nationally. And also, My Medicine Australia is the co-funder of Australia's largest psychedelic trial starting later this year. And that's actually a healthy person's trial. So we aren't actually taking chronically ill patients, but we're taking healthy people. And in fact, the people who are eligible for this trial starting later this year are are, are, are actually qualified therapists who either have completed the certificate in psychedelic assisted therapies, which is the training course which was launched in Australia and now headed by the Mind Medicine Institute, or people who have completed similar training overseas. And the core, I guess, the focus of this trial is to allow practitioners first-hand experience in actually going through a psychedelic trip, quote unquote, and that then also allows them to have that first-hand experience, which of course they can then impart onto their patients, which is a key aspect of a practitioner actually being an advocate for these therapies. And obviously looking now, we have collated a list of trials being done in Australia, and of course, and of course, New Zealand, and like we're looking at trials, I guess, using ibogaine, LSD, MDMA, psilocybin. So we aren't just seeing a focus on psilocybin and MDMA, but really, researchers are looking at the whole gamut of psychedelics, and I think it's just phenomenal as to what will happen.
I'm interested to know what the has been for the healthy trial, which the therapist
Sorry, it's cutting out.
You got to mute yourself, Grant.
Go for it.
If you
Oh, we're all muted.
Let's try one more time. I was saying that I'd be interested to know what the recruitment rates of the Healthy People trial would have been, in which the qualified therapists were able to experience it firsthand.
Sure. So we have ethics approval for 200 participants to be part of this trial, and we sent out an expression of interest in December and also January of this year, and so far we are looking at about 160 people or so, but we still have a lot more work to do in terms of actually reaching out to we are looking at reaching out to current trainees, so we will exceed the number of places for the trial, but unfortunately, we are bound by the ethics approval.
Yeah, we didn't really market that. We haven't really aggressively promoted that, and it filled up very, very, very quickly, I suppose, is the short answer, for obvious reasons, because as a therapist who's interested in this stuff, the ability to speak about it from first-hand experience is just so powerful for both the regulators, for understanding and influencing your own peers, and really being able to sort of guide the potential patient through that experience.
Yeah, I really do have to take the head off the person who came up with the idea of that trial, because you're right. Like, you can tell by how easy it was to recruit that the need is really then also the interest and the value of it. So I'm really interested to hear how that study progresses, and would love to read the article when it's published, which I'm sure will be in a couple of years, perhaps. So I did promise an under 60-minute Twitter space today, because I know that you guys are very busy. Let's just kind of backtrack and talk about psychedelics from like a layperson's point of view. If we were to introduce people to psychedelics and the idea of psychedelic-assisted therapies in a way of showing people why it is important that we support organizations or projects that want to fund more research into this space, or to even explore these education topics further, how might you describe it to someone, like a family member or a friend?
Great question. Well, look, these are really fascinating things, because I suppose there's elements that different people speak to about it. And the fun part for me about working in this space is that it really bridges together. Yeah, you've got, in some cases, some very conservative clinicians who are very interested in it. You've got some people who are interested in it just because they're interested in expanding their own consciousness. You've got spiritual people. But I suppose the way that I would explain it to, friends and family is that, and it kind of goes back to this idea of understanding what maybe mental health is, or what is the mind, what's really going on there. And it's that psychedelics let people access, parts of their mind that are in the subconscious and heal, subconscious beliefs and patterns that could be causing them distress in a conscious way that they're not aware of. And by having a tool that lets people access deeper parts of their mind, they can have much more effective and faster, results with therapy. And I think that's a kind of simple way to explain it to, that maybe makes sense just off the bat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I concur that ultimately these treatments are really tools, but the actual work is still up to the individual. So the medicine can give a person insight into their trauma and how to heal from it. But really, it's up to the individual to work with their therapist post-treatment and to really integrate the experience as part of their overall healing journey.
Yeah, that sums it up perfectly, and I think you guys did a really good job in expressing that with mind medicine, you're focusing wholly on the clinical application of these psychedelics. It really is a tool that we can add to the toolbox, and the toolbox is a bit more robust, and it's scientifically and evidence proven that these things can really work for the better of improving people's health. Then we really do need to support these extra initiatives and do our part as a community to break the taboo about it, and help with all of the things that you're doing, the advocacy work. If it's something that we are passionate about, we can definitely support mind medicine. How can we actually support you? I know that you now accept crypto donations, which is very exciting, but what are some other ways of supporting you guys and getting the word out about what you're doing?
Yeah, well, if you know any therapists who are tentatively interested in this, you can send them towards that training. And in my opinion, that's a really, really big piece of it, because at the end of the day, clinically speaking, it's going to be clinicians who prescribe and use these things. So getting them on board and getting them to understand and see the hope is a really big deal. Ilan, what else do you recommend?
Yeah, absolutely. And we haven't mentioned, but we do have a chapter grassroots movement, which started, I guess, by default. Like we started getting calls from your community, and people just wanted to have a diversified community of in-person sessions. And over the last 3 years, we've grown to a national chapter network of about, I think, close to 1,400 members, with over 35 chapters all around Australia, and also New Zealand, I think, has just started their second one as well. So if your members want to reach out and join them, by all means. And there's a training program, like Gavin said, and I would love to hopefully speak further about doing a webinar to your community as well.
Yes, I will definitely grab that opportunity with both hands, because I know that the community would be very interested in it. And as I said before, we can do some innovative activities to kind of make learning fun. I think that's one of the key things that comes to learning.
Absolutely. And then just on that note, of course, sign up to the fundamental program. In fact, we can send you a discounted link to share with your community after this session.
That would be fantastic. As I write up this interview, I can put it in a link at the bottom as well, just so people have easy access. It's a call to action to sign up to that fundamental course, which is self-paced, and get more understanding of mind medicine and what they're doing, but also psychedelic-assisted therapies, and also how to be part of that conversation with your friends and family, and how to express the need for it. And as a movement, as a community, as a mycelium, pardon the mushroom pun, we can really make great space in this movement as we continue to break the taboo and help educate and spread awareness of this really important topic. Any last words from either of you?
No, just thank you, so much for what you're doing, and the community you're building, and thank you for having us on. We've had a great time, and look forward to future collaborations.
Yeah, fantastic. This has just been a great session, and there's actually so much more to speak about, and I don't feel like we've touched, even a pinprick of what there is, but by all means, I'm happy to have another one.
Hey, I'm definitely.
This is
It's I mean, you're right. This is one of the things where we could do like a 6 week series, not a 12-week series on, because there's so much to uncover. And we, if you wanted to, we could totally pick a particular topic and expand it each week. Well, yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity for future collaboration, both on Twitter and also on our other platforms as well, because you're right, there's just so much to explore.
absolutely. Thank you for having us.
It was my pleasure. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We did promise at the very beginning that this Twitter space would be sub an hour, and we are hitting it on the mark, which is excellent. So once again, thank you so much to Gavin and Ilan from Mind Medicine. They're a registered charity based in Australia. They're supporting clinical research and really important advocacy work towards expanding treatment options available to people, primarily focusing on evidence-based psychedelic-assisted therapies. Thank you so much for joining us in this space. I will be signing out. So my name is Audrey. I'm the co-founder of Mushroom Mob. Mushroom Mob is an NFT project on the Cardano blockchain, and we focus on mental health and well-being. And our actions are heavily inspired by the mycelium. We like to get the community together to encourage health-promoting behaviors through fun activities. And we also really have a drive to support particular charities and organizations and causes which are related to fungi, our muse, such as fungi conservation, but also in terms of researching psychedelic-assisted therapies, such as psilocybin-assisted therapies for mental illness. So thank you again for joining us. The space was recorded, so if you came in late and you wanted to catch up on what was addressed earlier on, please do so. The recorded space will be available on the Mushroom Mob Twitter profile for another 30 days, but I also will be transcribing the interview, and it will be available in our Discord, along with the link with the discount code to the fundamental course that Mind Medicine mentioned earlier. And so if you had any questions, do let us know, and then I might be able to bring that to Mind Medicine and we can organize another Twitter space. But let's all keep in touch and continue the lines for future collaboration.
Thanks, Audrey.
Thank you so much, Audrey. Have a good day.